Today's topic is thesis statement and logical flow in paragraphs. The unit will introduce undergraduate students to two essential components of academic writing, the thesis statement and logical flow within paragraphs. It will explain how academic arguments are shaped around clear, arguable thesis statements rather than descriptive topics. The unit will also focus on paragraph-level coherence, demonstrating how ideas should be organized and connected so that arguments develop smoothly and persuasively. So we can start with a very fundamental question, which is asking what a thesis statement is. So we can begin with a simple but crucial idea. Academic writing is not primarily about information, it is rather about argument. Even when you're writing about a literary text, a historical event, a scientific issue, or a social phenomenon, you are expected to make a claim, a position that you will then support with reasoning and with evidence. The thesis statement is the sentence in which that claim is made explicit. In other words, the thesis statement tells the reader what you are arguing, what position you are taking, and what your essay is trying to demonstrate or prove. Without a thesis, an academic essay becomes a collection of observations, summaries, or loosely connected ideas. With a thesis, the essay becomes a directed, purposeful argument. A helpful way to think about a thesis is this. If your essay were reduced to one sentence, what would that sentence say? That sentence is your thesis statement. So let's go on to discussing the difference between a thesis and a topic. This is a common confusion. Many students are not clear about the difference between a topic statement and a thesis statement. Okay? So we can look at an example. Let's take this sentence. This essay discusses gender roles in Shakespeare's Macbeth. So this sentence is telling us what the essay is about, but not what the writer thinks. There is no argument here, only a description of content. Now compare that sentence with this one. In Macbeth, Shakespeare uses Lady Macbeth's rejection of traditional femininity to expose the instability of gender roles in a patriarchal society. Now, this second statement makes a claim, takes a clear position, and implies that evidence will be provided to support it. So that is the difference between a topic and a thesis. A useful test is the so what test. After reading your thesis statement, ask yourself, so what? Why should a reader care? If your thesis statement is carefully worded and clear, then the student should want to find out more about it. We can now move on to discussing the key characteristics of a strong thesis statement. A strong thesis statement usually has three essential qualities. First, it is arguable. An academic thesis must be something that can be debated or challenged. For example, I will give you a series of statements and you'll see that the first few are not theses, they are facts or descriptions. So for instance, Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. This is not a thesis, this is a fact. Macbeth explores ambition. This too is rather obvious and descriptive. This would not be called a thesis statement either. On the other hand, if I said, Shakespeare presents ambition in Macbeth as a destructive force that corrupts both personal morality and political order, this statement is arguable, it's debatable, and it is of an analytical nature. So that is what makes a thesis statement. If no reasonable reader could disagree with your statement, it is probably not a thesis statement. The second quality of a thesis statement is that it is specific. A vague thesis leads to a vague essay. Let's compare two statements. The first is this: social media has many effects on young people. And the second is this: excessive use of social media platforms like Instagram and TikTok contributes to anxiety amongst university students by encouraging constant social comparison. You'll notice that the second thesis narrows the focus, identifies a specific effect, and signals the direction of the argument. So specificity helps you as much as it helps the reader. It gives your essay boundaries. The third quality of a thesis statement is that it is substantive enough to sustain an entire essay. A thesis should not be so narrow that it can be proved in one paragraph. For instance, let's look at this statement. This essay argues that the color red appears frequently in The Handmaid's Tale. This is an observation, not an argument. Instead, if we said, Margaret Atwood uses the recurring image of the color red in The Handmaid's Tale to symbolize the control of women's bodies and reproductive power. Now, this claim requires explanation, it calls for textual evidence, and it creates the space for interpretation. So these then were the qualities of a thesis statement. We can move on to the next segment, which is on how the thesis is a kind of roadmap. In many academic contexts, especially at the undergraduate level, a thesis statement also functions as a roadmap. This means it gives the reader a sense of how the argument will unfold or what major points will be addressed. For example, let's look at this. This essay argues that colonial educational policies in India reinforced social hierarchies by privileging English literacy, marginalizing indigenous knowledge systems, and producing a new elite class aligned with colonial power. So clearly you can see here that there is a structure. The thesis statement clearly discusses separate issues: English literacy, indigenous knowledge systems, as well as elite class formation. So the thesis is creating space and is giving the student a sense of how the essay will unfold. The next point I'd like to make is about the working thesis. So when we set out to write academic writing, we may not have a final thesis in mind immediately. The thesis statement may not always be in a final form from the beginning. So many experienced writers begin with what they call a working thesis, which is a provisional claim that helps them to start writing. As they read more and think more and write more, the thesis often becomes sharper or more nuanced. For example, a working thesis might begin as, this essay examines power relations in George Orwell's 1984. After writing a draft, it may become sharper. It may be phrased as, in 1984, Orwell shows that authoritarian power is sustained not only through surveillance, but through the internalization of fear by ordinary citizens. So the revision has reflected thinking through writing, which is a core academic skill. We can next move on to discussing the proper place for a thesis. So you might wonder, where should a thesis statement go? So in most academic writing, the thesis statement appears in the introductory paragraph, and it is often placed near the end of the first paragraph. This placement helps to orient the reader early. Of course, in some disciplines and in more advanced forms of writing, the writer may choose to delay or to imply the thesis, but at the undergraduate level, clarity is usually valued, and it may be best to clearly state your thesis statement in your introductory paragraph. Let us now pause and test our knowledge to see if we have understood what a thesis statement is. I think we can try some quiz questions. Which of the following best describes a thesis statement? A summary of all the points discussed in an essay. B, a statement of personal opinion without evidence. C, a central arguable claim that guides the essay. And D, a general description of the essay's topic. The right answer is C, a central arguable claim that guides the essay. Let's try one more MCQ type question. Which of the following is not characteristic of a strong thesis statement? A, it is arguable. B, it is specific. C, it can be supported with evidence. D, it is a question posed to the reader. So here you should talk your way through the options. We already know that a strong thesis statement is arguable. We know that it is good if it is specific. We also know that it should be supported by evidence later in the essay. So most likely the wrong answer here is it is a question posed to the reader. A thesis statement may provoke thought, may get the reader thinking, but it is not necessarily a question posed to the reader. We can now move on to the second segment, which is on logical flow in paragraphs. Let's start by going from the thesis statement into paragraphs. Once you have a thesis, the next question is, how do you develop it? The answer is through paragraphs that work logically and coherently. Each paragraph should contribute to the thesis in a clear way. Paragraphs are not just visual breaks, they are units of thought. A useful principle is one paragraph equals one main idea that supports the thesis. So let us now find out what the role of the topic sentence is. You see, the topic sentence is the backbone of a paragraph. It usually appears at the beginning of a paragraph, states the main idea of that paragraph, and connects the paragraph to the thesis. For example, if your thesis is about social media and anxiety, a topic sentence might be, one major way social media contributes to anxiety among students is through constant exposure to curated and idealized images. You'll notice that this sentence introduces the paragraph's focus, prepares the reader for evidence, and signals relevance to the larger argument. Without a clear topic statement or sentence, paragraphs often feel unfocused or confusing. We can now move on to discussing the unity of a paragraph, staying on one idea. Unity means that all sentences in a paragraph relate to the same central idea. A paragraph loses unity when, for instance, new ideas are introduced without explanation or integration, examples do not clearly connect to the topic sentence, or the writer drifts into another point that belongs elsewhere. A useful revision question is, does every sentence in this paragraph help to develop the main idea stated in the topic sentence? If the answer is no, the sentence may need to be revised, moved, or deleted. We can now move on to discussing how to develop a paragraph using evidence and explanation. A strong academic paragraph usually follows a pattern like this. In 4 segments, a topic sentence, evidence, which might include quotations or data or examples, explanation or analysis, and finally either linking back to the thesis or transitioning forward into the next paragraph. Many weak paragraphs include evidence but lack explanation. Remember, evidence does not speak for itself. Writers must speak for it. For example, after quoting a text, ask, why is this quotation important? How does it support the claim? What does it reveal that is not immediately obvious? We can now move on to discussing logical flow within a paragraph. Logical flow refers to how sentences connect to each other in a way that feels natural and intelligible. Readers should never feel as though ideas are jumping randomly. How does one achieve this? Well, there are several key strategies to achieving flow. The first is the old to new information principle. This principle implies that there is an old to new pattern. You might begin a sentence by referring to something already mentioned, and then introduce new information. For example, let's look at these 2 sentences. This constant comparison can lead to feelings of inadequacy. These feelings in turn may contribute to increased anxiety and self-doubt. You'll notice that in these 2 sentences, the second sentence picks up the word feelings from the first sentence and then builds on it. So what you're doing is you're presenting information in an old to new pattern. The second strategy for logical flow in a paragraph is repetition of key terms. Repeating important words or phrases occasionally can help. Rather than constantly using synonyms, occasionally the student may want to repeat key words or phrases in order to maintain clarity. For example, repeating anxiety instead of switching randomly to stress, pressure, unease, or distress in a paragraph can help to retain some clarity. This will create a clear conceptual thread. The third strategy for maintaining a logical flow within a paragraph is transitions. Transitions should have purpose. These are not just decorative words like however or moreover. They signal logical relationships. The logical relationships may be of several sorts, for instance, a cause and effect relationship, or a contrast relationship, or a relationship of addition, or a relationship of sequence. For example, the word however signals contrast. The phrase as a result signals consequence. So, if B happens as a result of A, it is a consequence of A. A good way to organize these sentences is by using the phrase as a result to connect the two. The term for example signals a relationship of illustration. So you can see that transitions should reflect real relationships and should not be added mechanically into a paragraph. We can now move on to the next segment, which is on logical ordering of ideas. Flow in a paragraph also depends on order. Common logical patterns include general to specific, cause to effect, problem to solution, and claim to evidence. Ask yourself, is this the most logical order for a reader encountering these ideas for a first time? How do I organize the paragraph so that ideas are logically connected? What seems obvious to you may not be obvious to your reader, and therefore it is imperative that we order the ideas very logically. We can next discuss paragraph to paragraph flow. Logical flow does not stop at the paragraph level. Paragraphs should connect to each other, not exist as isolated blocks. This can be done by referring back to a key idea from the previous paragraph, or using transition sentences, or showing how the new paragraph advances the argument. For example, let's look at this. While social comparison explains one source of anxiety, another important factor is the pressure to perform a curated identity online. This sentence is linking backwards and forwards at the same time, ensuring that there is a paragraph-to-paragraph flow. We might next discuss diagnosing problems of flow. Students often sense intuitively that a paragraph doesn't sound right, but cannot explain why. Common warning signs include sentences that feel out of place, ideas that appear without preparation, excessive repetition without development, abrupt shifts in focus. Reading your work out aloud is a powerful diagnostic tool. If you have to stop and think about how your ideas connect, your reader will too. So this is something you can try in order to ensure that there is flow in your writing. We can next discuss revising your writing to ensure that there is flow and coherence. Revision is where strong academic writing is made. During revision, ask questions such as the following. Is the thesis clear and arguable? Does every paragraph support the thesis? Does each paragraph have a clear topic statement or sentence? Do the sentences connect logically? Good writing is rarely produced in a single draft. You need to sit and reread and revise your work, ask the kinds of questions that I just listed, and prepare a better and final draft. So the writing is shaped through a process of revision. Finally, we can conclude this unit by talking about what we have learned. So to conclude, thesis statements and logical flow in paragraphs are not separate skills, they are deeply connected. The thesis provides direction, paragraphs provide development, and logical flow ensures that the reader can follow your thinking. When these elements work together, academic writing becomes clear, persuasive, and intellectually satisfying. We can now pause for a moment and do some MCQ type quiz questions. We can now try a hand at some MCQ type questions on the topic of logical flow within paragraphs. So let's try the first question. What is the main function of a topic sentence in a paragraph? A. To provide evidence for the argument. B. To summarize the entire essay. C. To state the main idea of the paragraph. D. To introduce a quotation. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Here are the options again. What is the main function of a topic sentence in a paragraph? A. To provide evidence for the argument. B. To summarize the entire essay. C. To state the main idea of the paragraph. And D. To introduce a quotation. So the correct answer here is to state the main idea of the paragraph, which was option C. You see, providing evidence for the argument is what one does in the entire length of the paragraph. Summarizing the entire essay is something you do at the conclusion. C is the correct answer because the topic sentence contains the main idea that the paragraph will unpack and explore. All right, and D, option D is also wrong. A quotation is something that one can do in a paragraph, but it is not the topic sentence. All right, let's try another question. This is question 2. A paragraph lacks unity when, option A, it is longer than other paragraphs. B, it includes multiple unrelated ideas. C, it contains complex sentences. D, it uses transition words. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Again, the question is, a paragraph lacks unity when A, it is longer than other paragraphs. B, it includes multiple unrelated ideas. C, it contains complex sentences. And D, it uses transition words. The correct answer is B. It includes multiple unrelated ideas, because that is what would destroy the unity of a paragraph. A single paragraph is meant to deal ideally with a single idea, explore one idea fully. If you introduce many unrelated ideas, it breaks the unity of a paragraph. And if we look at the other options given here, let's talk our way through them. Option A, it is longer than other paragraphs. A paragraph might be slightly longer than your other paragraphs. This does not necessarily compromise its unity. C, it contains complex sentences. Again, in academic writing, one often does have to use complex sentences. This would not necessarily compromise the unity of the paragraph. And option D, it uses transition words. Well, this is a good thing. This, in fact, would help to create unity. It would not make the paragraph lack unity. So the correct answer here is option B. If there are multiple unrelated ideas, that is when a paragraph lacks unity. Let's do one more question. Which of the following helps most in creating logical flow within a paragraph? A, using advanced vocabulary. B, adding more examples. C, repeating key terms and ideas strategically. And D, avoiding topic sentences. Let's hear that one more time while you think about it. Which of the following helps most in creating logical flow within a paragraph? A, using advanced vocabulary. B, adding more examples. C, repeating key terms and ideas strategically. And D, avoiding topic sentences. So the correct answer is option C, repeating key terms and ideas strategically. Obviously, if you repeat key terms a few times properly and key ideas are highlighted, it will help the reader to maintain a logical flow through the paragraph. Let's talk our way through the other options. A, using advanced vocabulary. Using advanced vocabulary would not necessarily have much impact on logical flow at all. It might improve it, it might deter it, but it's certainly not something necessarily helping to create logical flow. Again, option B, adding more examples, is again not something that will help the most in creating logical flow within a paragraph. It can help to strengthen your argument, but to create that logical flow, what you need actually is key terms repeated strategically. Option D, avoiding topic sentences, again would not help to create a logical flow in the paragraph. It would make the paragraph more hard to comprehend. So the correct answer here is C, repeating key terms and ideas strategically. So let us summarize what we have just learned. Academic writing depends on the ability to make clear arguments and present them in a logically organized manner. This unit has helped students to understand the role of the thesis statement as the central claim that governs an academic essay. A strong thesis is specific, arguable, and capable of being supported through evidence and reasoning. The unit then examined how individual paragraphs contribute to this larger argument through logical flow and coherence. Students have learned how topic sentences establish flow, how evidence and explanation develops ideas, and how transitions and careful ordering of sentences creates continuity. Emphasis has been placed on diagnosing common problems such as vague theses, unfocused paragraphs, and abrupt shifts in ideas. By mastering these skills, students can write essays that are clearer, more coherent, and more persuasive. Thank you.